A mother will spend the rest of her life in prison for murdering her 6-year-old son. A Hennepin County judge today sentenced Julissa Thaler to life without parole this morning. Last year, police found her son, Eli Hart, shot to death in the trunk of her car.
It was an innocent, loving 6-year-old boy. He did not deserve this. Eli deserved to grow up and have a safe and happy life. This kind of trauma. But we have been sentenced to a lifetime of this pain. Confusion, grief, sorrow, and trauma. A lifetime without Eli.
Living out the nightmare of every parent, the worst nightmare of every parent. There's a difference between us, though, Tori. I couldn't do what you did. I couldn't if I lost my son.
We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Weldon K. McDavid, guilty of the crime of conspiracy to commit murder.
Hang on. All right, we're going to need to take a break. You're done. And if we could have, the jury go back into the jury.
One by one, she silenced their lives as if they were nothing more than obstacles in her way. The cold precision of her actions sent a shockwave through the community, shattering the very core of what it means to trust. But why? What could drive a mother to such a brutal end? The answer is not as simple as it seems. Stick with us as we uncover the chilling truth behind a case that will haunt you long after the screen goes dark. Welcome to The Last Verdict. In today's case, we dive into a heart-wrenching and shocking story that reveals the darkness lurking within a seemingly ordinary life. A mother who once vowed to protect became a perpetrator of unspeakable horrors. What led her down this path, and how did no one see the signs? If you're new to The Last Verdict, please subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our deep dives into shocking true crime cases. For our loyal subscribers, we can't thank you enough. Your support through likes, shares, and comments has helped us grow and spread awareness about these heartbreaking cases. We deeply appreciate each one of you for joining us in this important journey. Now let's get into the case that has captivated the world and left an indelible mark on those who followed it. Case 1.
A mother will spend the rest of her life in prison for murdering her 6-year-old son. A Hennepin County judge today sentenced Julissa Thaler to life without parole this morning. Last year, police found her son, Eli Hart, shot to death in the trunk.
It was an innocent, loving 6-year-old boy. He did not deserve this. Eli deserved to grow up and have a safe and happy life.
Ms. Thaler, you have a right to speak this morning if you'd like. You don't have any obligation to speak, but if you'd like to choose to speak, now is the time to do it.
Yes, I would like to say something.
Go ahead.
I'm innocent. Fuck you all. You're garbage. That's all, Your Honor.
Ms. Thaler, I don't know that that's appropriate here.
Sorry I told you what somebody else can.
What I would say is, the worst thing that seems to happen to parents is to lose their child. It's worse, though, when you don't lose your child to something like cancer or an accident.
Julissa Thaler. How far can a mother go when she is driven by rage, manipulation, or obsession? What would push someone to betray their children in the most brutal ways imaginable? In today's video, we'll explore the chilling story of Julissa Thaler, a mother whose horrifying actions resulted in the tragic death of her 6-year-old son, Eli Hart. This case is part of a broader series we'll be covering, where mothers who are meant to protect their children instead turn into predators. Each of these cases leaves behind unimaginable pain and betrayal, challenging our understanding of parental love and trust. It all began in Orono, Minnesota on May 20th, 2022, when local police pulled over a vehicle with a shattered rear window and a blown-out tire. Behind the wheel sat 29-year-old Julissa Thaler, a woman with a history of mental health struggles and substance abuse. In the trunk of her car was the lifeless body of her 6-year-old son, Eli Hart. He had been shot multiple times while strapped into his booster seat. But what the police uncovered next would shock the world. Not only had Eli been killed, But the system that was supposed to protect him had failed him tragically. What followed was a tragic, unimaginable turn of events that no one could have predicted. A young life was senselessly lost, and the consequences of a mother's betrayal shook the community to its core. Eli Hart was just 6 years old when he was taken. Known for his infectious smile and boundless energy, he was a bright, joyful boy who loved life. His presence lit up the room, and he was adored by everyone who knew him. Eli was full of curiosity, enjoying simple pleasures like playing outside, exploring the world, and spending time with his loved ones. But behind closed doors, Eli found himself caught in the middle of a bitter and ongoing custody battle between his parents. Julissa Thaler, his mother, had a history of mental health issues and substance abuse, which put her in a constant struggle with the child welfare system. Despite multiple reports of her unfitness as a mother, Eli was placed back in her custody in December 2021. For Eli, the love he felt for his mother was overshadowed by the deep struggle between his parents. And tragically, these struggles culminated in his senseless death. On that fateful day, May 20th, 2022, Julissa Thaler took her son for what was supposed to be a routine day out. They drove around, and it was later revealed that Julissa fatally shot Eli in the backseat of the car. With Eli's lifeless body still in the vehicle, Julissa continued to drive before being pulled over by police for a traffic violation. The discovery of Eli's body in the trunk was nothing short of horrifying. Police were stunned when they found him there, a child who had been taken from the world by his own mother, his life extinguished in such a cold and brutal manner. What made the crime even more horrific was the cold, calculated nature of it. Julissa Thaler didn't show any remorse, even after the crime was discovered. She drove around the city as if nothing had happened, and when police pulled her over, she lied about her whereabouts and her actions. But what was even more shocking was the way Julissa tried to cover her tracks. She claimed she had just dropped Eli off with his father, but the evidence in the trunk told an entirely different story. Police were stunned when they found Eli's body in the trunk, but even more shocking was the evidence of Julissa's deliberate actions. She had shot Eli multiple times with a shotgun while he was strapped in his booster seat, a chilling display of premeditation. Her story quickly fell apart under scrutiny as investigators uncovered key evidence that pointed directly to her as the primary suspect. The investigation also revealed a pattern of neglect and warning signs that had been overlooked by the child welfare system. Despite concerns about Julissa's mental health and substance abuse, Eli had been placed back into her custody just months before the murder. This systemic failure to act on the warning signs would prove to be one of the most tragic aspects of this case. As investigators delved deeper, they found key evidence that sealed Julissa Thaler's fate, including her actions after the murder, her behavior during the traffic stop, and her refusal to show any remorse for her son's death. The courtroom drama was filled with raw emotion as Eli's family members took the stand, describing the impact of his death. His father, Torrey Hart, spoke passionately about the loss of his son, describing Eli as his best friend, someone who brought light into his life. It was evident that the death of Eli had destroyed the family in ways that words could not fully convey. The defense attempted to argue that Julissa Thaler was not in her right mind, citing her history of mental illness and substance abuse. But the prosecution painted a very different picture, that of a cold, calculated murderer who had taken the life of her son in a premeditated act of violence. The details of the crime, the lack of remorse, and the attempt to cover up the murder painted a damning portrait of Julissa Thaler. But it was Julissa's reaction during sentencing that truly shocked the world. She erupted in a bizarre outburst, calling the court garbage and refusing to acknowledge her guilt. This emotional display, captured on camera, went viral, further enraging the public and underscoring her complete lack of accountability. In December 2022, Julissa Thaler was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge made it clear that there would be no leniency for the crime she committed. For Eli's family, the sentence provided little comfort. The loss of Eli was irreparable, and no amount of justice could bring him back. They were left to grapple with the heartbreaking reality of a mother who had taken her child's life, a tragedy made all the more devastating by the failure of the system that was supposed to protect him. What do you think about Julissa Thaler's actions? Could this have been prevented if child welfare services had acted differently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this case disturbing, don't forget to subscribe to The Last Verdict for more true crime stories, and make sure to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Case number 2, the case of Karen Matthews. It was a cold winter evening when the unthinkable occurred. A 9-year-old girl named Shannon Matthews, missing for over 24 days, was found hidden in a loft just a few miles from her home. The news sent shockwaves through the small town of Dewsbury, England. As the investigation unraveled, the truth became darker than anyone could have imagined. The very person who should have been searching for her mother, Karen Matthews, was at the heart of the twisted scheme. Karen Matthews was born in 1976 in Dewsbury, West Yorkshire, England. She had a difficult upbringing marked by periods of instability and poor relationships. Karen had several children from different fathers and was known to be in and out of relationships that often lacked stability. Her life was marked by a reliance on benefits, and she struggled to maintain steady employment or a consistent support network. Karen Matthews' life was filled with personal challenges, including multiple failed relationships and a history of using her children to garner attention. In the years leading up to Shannon's disappearance, Karen had made headlines before for various incidents that highlighted her tendency to manipulate those around her. There were signs of erratic behavior, including a history of using public systems and her children's vulnerabilities to gain sympathy. These troubling behaviors hinted at a deeper desire for attention, something that would eventually manifest in the horrifying crime. On February 19, 2008, Shannon Matthews was reported missing by Karen, who claimed her daughter had been abducted on her way home from school. The entire town rallied together for a search, and the police quickly mobilized. Karen Matthews, along with her other children, pleaded for Shannon's safe return on television, portraying herself as a distressed mother desperate for her daughter to be found. However, the truth was far more sinister than anyone could have guessed. Shannon Matthews was discovered on March 14, 2008, hidden in a loft above a nearby building, just a few hundred yards from her home. The chilling detail was that she had been kept alive by Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan, a man Karen had known, in an effort to gain money from the reward offered for Shannon's safe return. The entire abduction was a carefully orchestrated hoax. Shannon was kept confined, scared, and isolated during the 24-day ordeal, all for the sake of a financial gain from the media frenzy. What do you think triggered Karen Matthews to take such drastic and violent action? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The police investigation began in earnest once Shannon was reported missing. Initially, the authorities believed they were dealing with a standard kidnapping case. As the weeks passed without any leads, suspicion began to grow, particularly around Karen Matthews' behavior. Her tearful pleas for help and her odd demeanor during interviews raised questions. Eventually, the investigation led to the discovery of Shannon in the most unexpected place, a location she knew all too well. Key pieces of evidence that pointed to Karen's involvement in the crime were her repeated inconsistencies in the story, her relationship with Michael Donovan, and forensic evidence that linked them to the location where Shannon was hidden. The breakthrough came when the police were able to trace a series of phone calls and movements that led them to Donovan's property, where Shannon was found. Karen's participation in the hoax was revealed through her actions and misleading statements throughout the investigation. The trial of Karen Matthews was a media sensation, with the public unable to comprehend how a mother could betray her child in such a horrific way. Matthews was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. The courtroom drama unfolded with testimony from witnesses, police officers, and experts who described the psychological manipulation Karen had used on her own daughter and the entire community. A key moment during the trial was the revelation of Karen Matthews' cold behavior during the search. She was shown on television, sobbing for her missing daughter, while behind closed doors, she had masterminded the entire scheme. The emotional gravity of the case was palpable in the courtroom, with many unable to believe the extent of Matthews' deceit. In December 2008, Karen Matthews was convicted of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The case left the public reeling in disbelief, struggling to understand how a mother could exploit her own child for personal gain. Shannon Matthews was returned to her family, but the damage had already been done. The emotional trauma of the abduction and betrayal left scars on Shannon, and the community at large struggled to heal from the deceit. Karen's actions changed not only her family's life, but also how the public viewed parental responsibility and trust. Shannon's life would never be the same. The people of Dewsbury were devastated by the news of Shannon's abduction and subsequent revelation that her mother was behind it all. The local community had rallied around Karen Matthews, offering support and sympathy, only to discover that they had been misled by a woman they thought they knew. The betrayal was not only felt by the family, but then also by the community that had been invested in finding Shannon. The media coverage of the case was intense. News outlets focused on the shocking nature of the crime, and Karen Matthews became a symbol of maternal betrayal. The case raised public awareness about the potential for deception in cases involving missing persons and shifted perceptions of what could happen when a parent is driven by selfish motivations. Karen Matthews served her sentence, but was released on parole in 2012 after serving just a little over 3 years. Since her release, she has kept a low profile, with little public information available regarding her current life. It remains unclear whether she has shown any remorse for her actions, though public opinion is largely unforgiving. Do you believe Karen Matthews has shown true remorse? Should she ever be eligible for parole? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Case 3. Shirley Turner. It was a cold evening in the small town of St. John, Canada, when the unthinkable happened. In a tragic twist of fate, Shirley Turner, a seemingly normal mother, made a choice that would shatter her family and the community. As the news broke, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. What followed would expose a web of deception, rage, and an obsession that spiraled into a devastating act of violence. Shirley Turner, a respected member of her community, had been hiding dark secrets beneath a facade of normalcy. What was once thought to be an isolated tragedy, a mother's deep pain, would soon become one of the most chilling cases of maternal betrayal. The crime, committed in the dead of night, would leave a community in shock and raise questions about the limits of a parent's desperation. Shirley Turner was born in 1962 in the quiet town of St. John, New Brunswick. She grew up in a modest, working-class family. As a child, Shirley was described as intelligent and friendly, yet there were signs early on of an emotional fragility that would define much of her adult life. She pursued higher education and began a career in nursing, where she met and married a man, eventually having a family of her own. While Shirley's life appeared to be conventional on the surface, those closest to her began to notice signs of a more troubling side. She had a series of failed relationships, some of which were marred by accusations of manipulation and instability. The breakdown of her marriages and her obsessive need for control over others were early indicators that something darker was lurking beneath. There were also reports of Shirley's struggles with mental health, including bouts of depression and anxiety, which she never sought help for. The day Shirley committed the crime was, like many others, uneventful at first. She had been grappling with personal demons, including a difficult relationship with her children. Tensions had been building for weeks, fueled by her inability to cope with the pressures of motherhood and unresolved emotional pain. The final trigger came when Shirley's personal relationships began to unravel, and she found herself at a breaking point, ready to lash out. On the night of the crime, Shirley made a decision that would alter the course of her life and her family's future forever. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, she took the life of her child in a brutal act of violence. The coldness and premeditation of her actions would leave investigators and the community in disbelief. The quiet town of St. John would soon be forever marked by the horror of what occurred behind closed doors. Authorities were called to the scene after concerned relatives and neighbors reported a suspicious situation at Shirley's home. At first, it appeared to be a tragic accident, but evidence soon pointed to foul play. As the investigation unfolded, investigators discovered that Shirley had been hiding the truth for months. Her demeanor during the initial questioning was calm, almost too calm, which raised suspicions among the authorities. Key evidence was found, including Shirley's journals, where she had documented her increasingly erratic thoughts and fears. Her meticulous records painted a portrait of a woman in turmoil, torn between her role as a mother and her destructive tendencies. Investigators also found emails and text messages showing her obsession with a past lover, which seemed to further unravel her mental state. The courtroom drama was intense. with Shirley's defense arguing that she had acted in a moment of mental instability, while the prosecution painted her as a cold and calculating killer. Emotional testimonies from family members added to the weight of the trial as they recounted the toll Shirley's actions had taken on her children and the community. In a surprising twist, Shirley's defense revealed a letter she had written to her child just days before the crime, filled with guilt and promises of redemption. This letter, combined with expert testimony, would ultimately play a pivotal role in the final verdict. Shirley Turner was convicted of the murder of her child, and the sentence handed down was a mixture of shock and sorrow. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The victim's family, still grappling with the loss, expressed mixed feelings of anger and despair at the decision. They struggled to understand how a mother could commit such an unforgivable act. The impact of the crime was devastating for the victim's family. The shock of losing a loved one in such a violent way left deep emotional scars. The community was also affected, with many unable to reconcile the image of Shirley as a loving mother with the horrific reality of what she had done. It served as a harsh reminder of the fragility of mental health and the danger of untreated emotional turmoil. The community of St. John was rocked to its core. Neighbors who had known Shirley for years were left in disbelief. How could someone who seemed so ordinary and compassionate commit such a heinous crime? The case dominated local news, and there were widespread discussions about the hidden struggles of mothers and the stigmatization of mental illness. The media coverage was intense, with headlines and news outlets framing Shirley as both a victim of her own mental health struggles and a cold-blooded killer. There was a public debate about whether her crime could have been prevented and whether more support for mental health issues could have averted such a tragedy. The case sparked discussions about the pressures of motherhood and the dark side of domestic life. Shirley Turner remains incarcerated, serving her sentence in a maximum security prison. Reports on her mental health have indicated periods of remorse and reflection, though her actions remain unforgivable in the eyes of many. She has been involved in prison programs aimed at rehabilitation, but there are questions about whether true change is possible after such a violent act. What do you think about Shirley's actions? Could this crime have been prevented? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Case number 4, the case of Louise Porton. It was a cold January morning in 2018 when emergency responders were called to a quiet suburban home in Rugby, Warwickshire, UK. Inside, they found the lifeless body of a young child, and what followed would lead to a chilling unraveling of one of the most horrifying cases the town would ever know. Louise Porton, a 23-year-old mother, was arrested in connection with her 2 daughters' deaths, and what would unfold over the coming months would reveal a dark truth about the woman who was meant to protect them. The case revolves around Louise Porton, a mother who was charged with the murder of her 2 young daughters, Lexi, age 3, and Scarlett, age 17 months. Both children were found dead in their home in January and February of 2018. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that these deaths were not accidental, and the chilling truth of their mother's actions would come to light during the trial. Porton's cold demeanor and the disturbing details of her behavior throughout the investigation would ultimately lead to her being convicted of both murders. Louise Porton was born on July 14, 1990, in Rugby, a small town in Warwickshire, England. Growing up, she had a turbulent childhood, with some reports suggesting issues with her family relationships. Her early years were marked by instability, which would later be reflected in her adult life. Porton's life appeared to be a series of troubling relationships. At the time of her children's deaths, she was involved in a series of short-term relationships, and some of these individuals expressed concerns over her behavior. During her trial, it was revealed that she seemed indifferent to her children's well-being and had made disturbing comments about her role as a mother. Her social media presence showed a stark contrast between her public and private personas, with her posts often suggesting a carefree attitude toward parenting. These early signs of neglect and her erratic behavior might have been a foreshadowing of the tragic events that would unfold. The deaths of Porton's daughters occurred in quick succession. On January 15, 2018, her eldest daughter, Lexi, was found unresponsive at their home. Despite efforts to revive her, Lexi was pronounced dead. Just 24 days later, on February 1, 2018, Scarlett, Porton's youngest daughter, was found dead under similar circumstances. It was in the aftermath of Scarlett's death that the investigation into the cause of these tragedies began to unravel the disturbing truth. The shocking nature of these deaths was compounded by Porton's lack of emotional response. Neighbors and friends reported that she seemed strangely indifferent after her children's deaths, even going so far as to continue her daily life as though nothing had happened. During the police investigation, Porton was described as cold and detached, showing no remorse for her actions. The chilling moment came when police discovered that both children had been suffocated, and evidence suggested that their deaths were not accidents, but intentional. The investigation into the deaths of Lexi and Scarlett began shortly after Scarlett's death in February 2018. Initial suspicion was raised by the unusual nature of both deaths, especially given the close proximity of the two events. Louise Porton's behavior and her response to her daughter's deaths were heavily scrutinized. Authorities also discovered that Porton had been researching ways to harm her children, which added a disturbing layer to the case. During the investigation, it was revealed that Porton had been researching how to kill a child on her phone, and she had also searched for information on life insurance policies for her daughters. Additionally, a review of her phone showed that she had been making plans to meet with men and go on dates while her children were still alive. These discoveries, coupled with the autopsies, which confirmed the cause of death to be asphyxiation, led to Porton's arrest. The trial of Louise Porton began in November 2018. Prosecutors presented evidence that painted a picture of a cold and calculating woman who had used her children to further her own desires, ultimately deciding to end their lives to be free of the responsibilities of motherhood. The defense argued that Porton was struggling with her mental health, but the jury found her guilty of both murders. One of the most shocking moments in court came when it was revealed that Porton had been messaging men while her daughters' bodies were still warm, showing no signs of grief or remorse. This stark contrast between her behavior and the gravity of the situation left many in the courtroom in disbelief. Louise Porton was sentenced to life imprisonment on February 5, 2019, for the murders of her two daughters. The judge stated that the case was one of the most chilling examples of maternal infanticide he had ever encountered. Porton was told that she would serve a minimum of 32 years before being considered for parole. The impact on Lexi and Scarlett's extended family was devastating. Their grandparents, aunts, and uncles struggled to comprehend how a mother could be capable of such a heinous act. The community, which had once seen Porton as a young mother trying to cope with the challenges of raising two young children, was left in shock and disbelief. The case sparked widespread outrage and sadness in the rugby community. Many were shocked by the coldness displayed by Porton, and some found it hard to reconcile the image of a young mother with the horrific actions she had committed. The media coverage of Louise Porton's case was intense, with reporters closely following the trial and presenting the grim details of the crime. Public perception was overwhelmingly negative, with many expressing outrage over the apparent lack of remorse shown by Porton. The case also raised questions about the mental health of parents and the warning signs of child abuse. As of 2020, Louise Porton remains incarcerated at a high-security prison in the UK. There have been no reports of significant remorse or rehabilitation on her part. The case continues to draw public attention, particularly given the cold nature of her actions. Do you believe Louise Porton has shown true remorse? Should she ever be eligible for parole? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Sei contento? Lo certo se ti dico, prega Dio, che ti trovo posto, perché ti ammazzo con il denaro questo,
Veronica Panarella. It was the early morning of February 15, 2015, when Veronica Panarella made a chilling discovery. The usually calm neighborhood in El Paso, Texas, was shaken by a violent and shocking event that would expose a dark undercurrent of deceit and manipulation. As emergency responders arrived, they were met with a horrifying scene that no one could have anticipated. What followed was a police investigation that would uncover secrets, unravel the life of a seemingly ordinary woman, and reveal an unthinkable betrayal. Veronica Panarella, a 33-year-old mother of two, was arrested after being implicated in the brutal murder of her estranged husband, Michael Panarella. What appeared at first to be a tragic accident quickly became clear as something far darker. as investigators discovered a tangled web of financial strain, hidden motivations, and a plot that would change the lives of everyone involved forever. In this case, betrayal, greed, and manipulation took center stage, leading to an unexpected and chilling outcome. As the story unfolds, viewers will uncover what drove Veronica to commit such a horrific crime and the shocking moments that followed. Veronica Panarella was born in Dallas, Texas in 1982. Growing up in a middle-class family, she seemed to have a typical childhood, though her relationship with her parents was strained, especially after her parents' divorce when she was 16. After high school, Veronica attended community college, but her academic pursuits were short-lived, and she soon found herself working various low-paying jobs. By her late 20s, she had met and married Michael Panarella, a successful mechanic with his own business. Together, they had 2 children, and for a time, their life seemed ordinary. Despite an outwardly stable life, Veronica's personal struggles began to surface early in the marriage. She was known to have a volatile temper, and there were multiple reports of heated arguments with Michael, often related to financial difficulties and Veronica's growing dissatisfaction with their life together. Her behavior became more erratic as the years passed, and there were rumors of infidelity on her part. Friends and family started to notice that Veronica's personality was shifting from a nurturing mother to someone consumed by resentment and bitterness. It was clear that something was amiss, though no one could have predicted the shocking actions that were about to unfold. February 15, 2015 began like any other morning for Veronica. However, tensions were at an all-time high. She had recently been informed that Michael was planning to file for divorce, which would leave her with limited financial support. The thought of losing her home, her children's security, and her lifestyle drove her to a desperate place. It was during a heated argument that Veronica snapped, crossing a line she would never return from. Her decision was cold and calculated. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she wasn't going to let anything or anyone stand in her way. As the argument escalated, Veronica resorted to violence. She struck Michael with a blunt object, leaving him unconscious on the floor. She then staged the scene to look like an accident, pouring gasoline around the house and setting it on fire, hoping the flames would destroy any evidence of her involvement. But the fire department quickly arrived, and they found Michael's body inside the house, leading to a swift investigation that would uncover the truth. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, they initially believed it was an accidental fire. However, the discovery of Michael's body in the living room, along with signs of blunt force trauma, suggested foul play. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Veronica, who was acting suspiciously calm and composed when questioned. The fact that she had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Michael only deepened the suspicions of the authorities. Detectives uncovered evidence of Veronica's financial troubles and her secret bank accounts, which had been funded by Michael's life insurance policy. They also found her texts and emails, which revealed that she had been researching ways to cover up a crime. Her actions during the investigation were evasive. She offered contradictory statements and failed to show any signs of remorse. The trial took place in 2016, where the prosecution presented a damning case, outlining Veronica's financial motives, her erratic behavior, and her cold, calculated actions leading up to Michael's death. The defense argued that Veronica had acted in self-defense, but the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. One of the most shocking moments in the trial came when Veronica's best friend took the stand. She revealed that Veronica had confided in her about the murder in the weeks leading up to the incident, showing no remorse but only a sense of relief at the thought of getting rid of Michael. The friend's testimony weighed heavily on the jury's decision. Veronica was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The victim's family expressed relief at the verdict, but they were also left devastated by the loss of Michael. They described him as a loving father and husband who had been taken from them in the most horrific way. The crime left an indelible mark on the Panarella family. Michael's children were forced to grow up without a father, and the community was shaken by the brutality of Veronica's actions. For her children, the trauma of losing both parents, one to murder, the other to prison, was immeasurable. The crime sent shockwaves through the local community. Many were left reeling, unable to comprehend how a mother could commit such a brutal act. The case sparked debates on the pressures faced by women, the impact of financial strain on mental health, and the hidden struggles that may lurk behind closed doors. The media coverage of the case was intense, with many outlets focusing on Veronica's seemingly perfect life that had been shattered by greed and violence. Public opinion was divided, with some expressing sympathy for Veronica's financial troubles, while others believed she was simply a cold-blooded killer. The case raised larger questions about the justice system and the consequences of domestic violence. Veronica is currently serving her life sentence at the Texas Women's Prison in Gatesville, Texas. She has shown no signs of remorse for her actions, and her behavior remains unchanged since the trial. She has not sought parole and seems resigned to her fate. Do you believe Veronica has shown true remorse? Should she ever be eligible for parole? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Brittany Pillington. On the night of November 1st, 2013, at around 2:00 a.m., a chilling discovery was made in the small town of Baker, Louisiana. Brittany Pillington, a mother of 5, was found dead under suspicious circumstances. What initially seemed like a tragic accident would soon unravel into a web of lies, manipulation, and an unimaginable betrayal. The case would reveal dark truths about Brittany's life, her relationships, and the tragic events leading up to her death. Brittany Pillington, just 25 years old, was found dead in her home after an apparent suicide. However, the investigation into her death would uncover a much darker reality. Her husband, Robert Pillington, would eventually be charged with her murder. What followed was a series of shocking revelations that would leave the community in disbelief and the public questioning how well they truly knew the people around them. Robert Pillington was born and raised in Louisiana. Growing up, he faced many challenges, including a turbulent childhood filled with emotional scars. He had a history of legal troubles, including prior arrests for assault, but his relationship with Brittany was initially seen as one of love and stability. They married in 2009, and over the years they had 5 children together. Despite his rough past, Robert managed to convince those around him that he had turned a new leaf for the sake of his family. Robert's past was littered with violent tendencies. He had been involved in several altercations and was known to have a temper. Friends and family members noted his controlling nature, often isolating Brittany from her loved ones. There were whispers about his abusive behavior, though nothing concrete had ever been brought to light. It wasn't until after Brittany's death that a clearer picture of Robert's toxic and manipulative nature began to emerge. In the days leading up to Brittany's death, there were signs of increased tension between her and Robert. Brittany had started confiding in close friends about feeling trapped in the marriage, describing her fear of Robert's temper and controlling behavior. The night of November 1st, 2013, was one of those rare moments where Brittany reached out to a friend, telling them she was afraid. But by the time help could arrive, it was too late. Brittany's body was discovered at around 2:00 a.m., lying in the living room. Initially, authorities believed it was a suicide as there were signs of a struggle but no clear cause of death. However, upon further investigation, it was revealed that Brittany had been strangled, and signs of blunt force trauma were found on her body. The discovery of these details painted a much darker picture of what had transpired in the home that night. The initial investigation into Brittany's death seemed to point towards suicide. However, as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered inconsistencies in Robert's statements and began to suspect foul play. One key breakthrough came when investigators found a series of text messages between Brittany and a friend in the hours before her death, which contradicted Robert's version of events. The investigation revealed several key pieces of evidence, including security camera footage that showed Robert leaving the house in the early hours of the morning. Additionally, forensic experts found signs of strangulation and blunt force trauma, which led to the conclusion that Brittany's death was a homicide, not a suicide. Robert's behavior during the investigation was telling. He was calm, evasive, and refused to cooperate fully with authorities, which raised red flags. The trial began in 2015, and it was filled with emotional testimonies and heated debates. The prosecution presented a case that painted Robert as a controlling and abusive husband who ultimately killed Brittany when she decided to leave him. The defense, however, argued that Brittany's death was a tragic accident, not murder. The trial was a battle of contrasting narratives, with the emotional toll on Brittany's family evident throughout the proceedings. One of the most shocking moments in the trial came when Robert's own daughter testified about witnessing violent behavior between her parents. The emotional weight of her testimony left many in the courtroom in tears, and it became a pivotal moment that would help sway the jury's opinion. In December 2015, Robert Pillington was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The conviction was a hard-fought victory for Brittany's family, who had spent years fighting for justice. Brittany's parents and friends were relieved, but the pain of losing her would never fully heal. The impact of Brittany's death on her family was profound. Her parents were devastated by the loss, and her 5 young children were left without their mother. The community, once shocked by the crime, rallied behind Brittany's family, offering support during the trial and aftermath. Despite Robert's conviction, the emotional scars left on the family would take years to heal. The crime sent shockwaves through the small town of Baker, Louisiana. Many people who knew Robert and Brittany were stunned to learn of the abuse that had been hidden behind closed doors for years. The case became a point of discussion in the community, with many expressing disbelief that someone could commit such an act of violence against their own spouse. The media coverage of Brittany's death focused on the shocking nature of the crime and the betrayal that Brittany suffered at the hands of her husband. Public opinion was divided. While many were supportive of the conviction, others questioned the justice system's ability to handle domestic violence cases effectively. The case sparked wider conversations about the need for better support systems for victims of domestic abuse. As of now, Robert Pillington remains in prison, serving his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Since his conviction, he has shown little remorse for his actions, continuing to maintain his innocence. However, the lack of remorse and refusal to take responsibility for his actions has only fueled public anger towards him. What do you think about Robert Pillington's actions? Could this crime have been prevented? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As we close the pages on these cases, we are left with haunting questions and chilling truths. Each story is a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind closed doors, the betrayal of trust, and the unspeakable pain endured by victims. The justice system may offer its verdict, but the scars, both seen and unseen, remain for those left behind. In every case, the silence of the past speaks louder than words, and the unanswered questions linger like a shadow. But in the end, justice prevails for some, while others are forever trapped in a web of their own making. As the final gavel falls, we are left to wonder, could this have been prevented? Who will be held accountable for the lives that were taken, shattered, or forever changed? The last verdict doesn't just recount these stories. We challenge you to think, to question, to act. If you're disturbed by what you've heard, don't turn away. The truth doesn't stop here. The victims' voices still echo, and the search for justice continues. Subscribe to The Last Verdict and hit the notification bell, because these stories don't end. They're waiting to be heard, and their truth demands to be told. Stay vigilant, stay aware, and remember, the last word is never truly spoken until we uncover the full truth.